Hello, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful rest tonight. I know many of you use these videos to help you unwind and drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Get cozy, settle in, and let's journey into tonight's story. Relax and let the soothing sounds carry you away. The road to Blackwood Manor was long and winding, bordered by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The tall, skeletal trees clawed at the overcast sky, their twisted branches resembling fingers reaching for something unseen. Emily Harper tightened her grip on the steering wheel as her car bumped along the uneven dirt road. She glanced at her brother, Michael, who was dozing in the passenger seat, his headphones firmly in place. "Typical," Emily muttered under her breath, stifling her irritation. The weight of their recent inheritance felt like a stone in her chest. Blackwood Manor, a sprawling, decaying estate in the middle of nowhere, had been left to them by their late great-uncle, a man neither of them had ever met. When the manor finally loomed into view, Emily's breath caught in her throat. The house was enormous, its once grand facade now cracked and weathered. The windows, many of them broken or clouded with grime, seemed to stare down at her like empty eyes. Ivy crawled up the stone walls, and the wrought iron gate creaked ominously as she pushed it open. "Wake up," she said, nudging Michael. He stirred, blinking groggily at the sight of the manor. "That's it? Looks like it's about to fall apart." "Yeah, well, it's ours now." The interior of the manor was just as foreboding as the outside. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. Faded portraits hung on the walls, their subjects staring out with expressions that seemed to shift when Emily wasn't looking directly at them. They spent the first day cleaning and exploring. Emily discovered an old journal in the study, its leather cover cracked with age. The entries were written in elegant cursive, detailing the life of one Edmund Blackwood, their great-uncle. The later entries grew erratic, filled with mentions of the shadows and whispers in the dark. That night, Emily and Michael decided to sleep in the same room, too unsettled by the house's oppressive silence to be alone. As Emily drifted off to sleep, she thought she heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. But when she opened her eyes, the house was still. The second night brought more disturbances. Emily woke to the sound of whispering. She sat up, her heart pounding, and strained to listen. The voices were faint but distinct, a chorus of murmurs that seemed to rise and fall like the tide. She shook Michael awake. "Do you hear that?" Michael rubbed his eyes, groaning. "Hear what?" The whispers stopped. "I swear there were voices," Emily insisted, but Michael dismissed it as her imagination. Frustrated, she grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the hallway. The beam of light flickered as she moved, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. She paused at the top of the staircase, certain she saw a figure standing below. When she aimed the flashlight, the figure was gone. The next day, Emily convinced Michael to help her search the manor for anything unusual. They discovered a hidden door behind a bookshelf in the library. It led to a narrow staircase spiraling down into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint smell of earth and rot grew stronger. At the bottom, they found a small, windowless room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and a dusty table in the center held an array of objects: candles, an old dagger, and a book bound in what looked disturbingly like leather. Emily opened the book and immediately recoiled. Its pages were filled with grotesque illustrations and incomprehensible text. "What the hell was Uncle Edmund into?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. From that night on, the disturbances became impossible to ignore. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects moved when no one was looking, and the whispers grew louder. Emily began seeing shadowy figures in the corners of her vision, always disappearing when she turned to face them. Michael's skepticism waned as he experienced the phenomena himself. One night, they heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the house. Rushing to the source, they found nothing but an icy draft and a deep scratch running along the wall. Desperate for answers, Emily delved deeper into Edmund's journal. She discovered references to a ritual meant to bind the shadows and keep them at bay. Edmund had apparently failed. and the shadows had claimed him. She found a final, cryptic entry. The house must be sealed. The bloodline cannot escape its curse. Emily realized the ritual was unfinished. To end the haunting, they would have to complete it. Emily and Michael gathered the necessary items from the hidden room. As they began the ritual, the house seemed to come alive. The walls trembled, and a deafening roar filled the air. Shadowy figures emerged, their forms writhing and indistinct, their voices a cacophony of anger and despair. Michael faltered, but Emily shouted for him to continue. Chanting the incantation from Edmund's journal, they poured their energy into the ritual. The shadows surged toward them, but just as they seemed ready to engulf the siblings, a blinding light erupted from the circle they had drawn. When the light faded, the shadows were gone, and the house was silent. Emily and Michael left Blackwood Manor the next day, vowing never to return. The house, now lifeless and still, seemed to watch them as they drove away. Years later, the manor was demolished, but locals still spoke of strange happenings in the woods where it once stood. Some claimed to hear whispers on the wind. Others swore they saw shadows moving where there should be none. The curse of Blackwood Manor had ended, but the echoes of its darkness lingered, a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. Story number 2. Between waking and dreaming. For as long as Claire could remember, her dreams were vivid. Not just the kind of vivid that made you wake up thinking you'd watched a movie, but the kind that lingered, leaving traces on her waking hours like a film of mist. Her dreams seemed to bleed into reality. A door left ajar when she remembered closing it, a familiar face in a crowd she couldn't place, or a fragment of a melody she could never quite hum correctly. She first noticed the peculiarity when she turned 12. That night, she dreamed of a tall man in a charcoal suit standing at the end of her bed, his hands clasped in front of him. "Claire," he had said, his voice echoing as though it came from the depths of a cavern. "You're drifting closer." Closer to what, she never knew. The man's presence became a recurring figure in her dreams, always standing just on the edge of her consciousness. He never moved closer, never touched her, but his words stayed. Over time, she learned to call him the Watcher. By the time she reached her 20s, Claire had accepted that her dreams were not like those of others. Where most people forgot their dreams minutes after waking, hers stayed intact. A rich tapestry woven with details so intricate they felt real. But it wasn't until she moved into her grandmother's old Victorian house after her passing that the true depth of her dreaming unfolded. The house itself was a labyrinth of shadows and creaks, its walls lined with faded wallpaper depicting sprawling forests. Her grandmother, a woman with a penchant for the arcane, had left behind shelves of books on dreams, lucid dreaming, and the dream realm. Claire initially dismissed these as mere curiosities until the night she found the journal. It was hidden in a compartment behind her grandmother's wardrobe, wrapped in layers of yellowed parchment. The cover bore an embossed moon, and inside the entries were dated back decades. The handwriting, delicate and slanted, was undeniably her grandmother's. August 12th, 1957. I found the doorway again. The Watcher is waiting, but I dare not step through. He says it is my time, but I fear what lies beyond. Claire's heart raced. The Watcher. She flipped through the pages, finding more entries, each describing her grandmother's encounters in the dream realm. It spoke of doors that led to places both beautiful and terrifying, and of a labyrinth, a shifting maze where time and space unraveled. That night, Claire dreamed of the labyrinth for the first time. It began with a door. She stood in the hallway of her grandmother's house, but the wallpaper seemed to move, the trees swaying as though caught in a breeze. At the end of the hallway was a door she had never seen before, its frame glowing faintly. As she stepped closer, the door swung open, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. The Watcher stood at the top of the stairs, his presence as unsettling as ever. "You're ready now," he said, his voice carrying an air of finality. Against her better judgment, Claire descended. The air grew colder with each step, and when she reached the bottom, she found herself in the labyrinth. The walls were alive, shifting with a liquid-like quality. Pathways opened and closed in an ever-changing dance, and the ground beneath her feet pulsed like a heartbeat. The air was thick with whispers, voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. "What is this place?" she asked aloud. The watcher appeared beside her, his movements as fluid as the walls. "This is the lucid labyrinth. It exists between worlds, a bridge between waking and dreaming. Few can reach it, and fewer still can leave." Fear coiled in her stomach. "Why am I here?" He smiled faintly, the first time she had seen any expression cross his face. "You've always been here, Claire. The labyrinth is as much a part of you as your own heartbeat, but now you must navigate it. Your life depends on it." As she wandered the labyrinth, Claire encountered trials, puzzles that tested her mind and memories. In one room, she was surrounded by mirrors, each reflecting a version of herself at different ages. A voice instructed her to find the true self. After hours of agonizing over the reflections, she realized the answer wasn't in the mirrors but in her own mind. Closing her eyes, she declared, "I am all of them." The mirrors shattered, revealing a new path. Another trial forced her to confront her greatest fears. She found herself standing in the middle of a vast ocean, the waves lapping at her ankles. The water rose steadily, threatening to consume her. But as panic set in, she remembered her grandmother's journal. "The labyrinth thrives on fear. Master it, and you master the maze." Drawing a deep breath, she willed the water to recede. To her astonishment, it obeyed. Weeks passed in the labyrinth, or so it seemed. Time was meaningless there, and Claire began to lose her sense of self. Yet through every trial, she felt herself growing stronger, more attuned to the labyrinth's rhythms. She started to understand its language, the way it communicated through subtle shifts and symbols. One day, she found herself in a room unlike any other. The walls were lined with books, and at the center was a pedestal holding a single tome. As she approached, she saw her name etched on the cover. Opening it, she discovered her life written in perfect detail, from her earliest memories to her current moment in the labyrinth. The final page was blank. The watcher appeared once more. "The labyrinth has shown you the truth. Your life is a tapestry woven by your choices, and this," he gestured to the blank page, "is yours to write." Claire hesitated. "What happens if I leave?" "The labyrinth will always be with you," he replied. "But remember, not all who navigate it find their way back." With a deep breath, she picked up the pen that materialized beside the book. She wrote a single word: "Awake." Claire's eyes flew open. She was in her bed, the morning light streaming through the curtains. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. But as she sat up, she saw the journal on her nightstand, its moon emblem gleaming faintly. She opened it, flipping to the final page. There, written in her own handwriting, was the word she had chosen: awake. The labyrinth had changed her. She could feel it in the way the world seemed sharper, more alive. The lines between dreams and reality had blurred, but she no longer feared it. The watcher's words echoed in her mind. "The labyrinth is as much a part of you as your own heartbeat." And so Claire stepped into her new life, knowing the labyrinth would always be there, waiting for her to return. Story number 3, The Harbinger's Call. It was a town nestled deep in the throes of the Appalachians, obscured by dense forestry and shrouded in mist. White Pines was the sort of place that rarely appeared on maps and never lingered in memory for long. Its seclusion was by design, a peculiar arrangement with nature that the townsfolk rarely questioned, until they had no choice. Lydia Harper had been away from White Pines for nearly a decade, pursuing an ambitious career in investigative journalism. She returned not for nostalgia, but for closure, summoned by the death of her estranged grandmother, Eleanor Harper. The letter she received was terse, typed on brittle yellowing paper. "Lydia, she's gone. Return home. It's urgent." No name, no signature, but the postmark bore White Pine's familiar stamp. By the time Lydia arrived, dusk had settled, painting the town in shades of orange and gray. The air felt oppressive, thick with an unspoken dread. She noticed immediately that the streets were emptier than she remembered. Doors were shut, curtains drawn, and not a single child's laughter punctuated the eerie silence. She wondered if the town had always been this lifeless, or if something had changed in her absence. The Harper estate sat at the edge of the woods, a sprawling Victorian manor whose grandeur had been worn down by neglect. The house loomed like a sentinel, its windows dark in eyes that bore witness to countless secrets. Lydia stepped onto the creaking porch and hesitated before knocking, but the door swung open before she could. A frail woman with watery blue eyes greeted her. "You came," the woman said, her voice a brittle whisper. "I wasn't sure you would." "Aunt Margaret?" Lydia recognized her mother's older sister, though the years had hollowed her cheeks and silvered her hair. Margaret ushered her inside, locking the door behind them with deliberate care. The house smelled of decay, a mix of mildew and something metallic. As they walked through the dimly lit corridors, Lydia noticed that many of the family portraits were missing from the walls, leaving pale outlines where they had once hung. "I need answers," Lydia began, but Margaret raised a trembling hand to silence her. "Not yet. It's not safe to speak freely. Not here." Lydia wanted to protest, but the haunted look in Margaret's eyes silenced her. Margaret led her to the parlor, a room cluttered with dusty books, antique furniture, and a single lit lantern. The fireless hearth gave off no warmth, and the shadows seemed unnaturally deep. "What happened to Grandma?" Lydia asked, lowering her voice. Margaret's expression darkened. "She's gone. Taken." "Taken? By who? Or what?" Margaret hesitated, her hands wringing together. "By the Harbinger." Lydia blinked. "The Harbinger? What is that?" Margaret's voice dropped to a near whisper. "An ancient thing, older than the mountains, older than memory. It comes when the balance is broken." "What balance?" Before Margaret could answer, a deep, resonant knock echoed through the house. Both women froze. Margaret's face drained of color as she clutched Lydia's arm. "Don't answer it," she hissed. "No matter what you hear, do not answer." The knocking persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Then came the voice. Low, guttural, and impossibly resonant, it called Lydia's name. "Lydia Harper," it intoned. "Open the door." Every instinct screamed at Lydia to run, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. "Who is that?" she whispered. Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she dragged Lydia deeper into the house, past the parlor and into a small study. She locked the door behind them and pulled a heavy book from the shelf. Inside was a hollowed-out compartment containing a key and a rolled-up piece of parchment. "What is this?" Lydia asked. "The truth," Margaret replied, handing her the parchment. "Read it when you are alone. And remember, the Harbinger doesn't ask twice." As if on cue, the knocking ceased. An eerie silence descended, broken only by Lydia's ragged breathing. Margaret gestured toward a hidden door at the back of the study. "Go," she urged. "The forest will hide you." "What about you?" Margaret smiled faintly, a sad, resigned expression. "My time is over. Yours is just beginning." Before Lydia could protest, Margaret shoved her toward the hidden door and shut it behind her. The passage was narrow and cold, lined with rough-hewn stone. She clutched the parchment tightly as she made her way forward, the faint light of the study fading behind her. The passage opened into the forest, where the air was colder still. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Lydia unfolded the parchment, her hands shaking. The writing was in her grandmother's hand, detailing a pact made generations ago. The Harbinger, the letter explained, was a guardian of balance. White pines thrive because of the pact, an agreement that demanded a sacrifice every 50 years. Eleanor had refused to honor it, breaking the cycle. Now the Harbinger sought retribution. Lydia's mind reeled. Was this some elaborate myth, a tale to keep the townsfolk in line? Or was there truth to it? The answer came in the form of a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the air. She turned and her breath caught. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was humanoid in shape but impossibly tall, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its face was obscured by a veil of shadow, but its eyes burned like embers. The Harbinger. "Lydia Harper," it rumbled, its voice echoing through the forest. "Your bloodline is forfeit." Lydia ran. The forest seemed to conspire against her, roots snagging her feet and branches tearing at her clothes. She stumbled into a clearing where an ancient stone altar stood. Symbols were etched into its surface, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The Harbinger appeared at the edge of the clearing, its presence suffocating. Lydia's mind raced. She remembered the key Margaret had given her. Frantically, she searched her pockets and found it. The altar had a keyhole hidden among the carvings. She inserted the key and turned it. A deep hum resonated through the air as the symbols flared to life. The Harbinger froze, its form flickering like a shadow caught between worlds. "You cannot undo what has been broken," it growled. But Lydia wasn't trying to undo anything. She was making a new pact. "Take me," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "Spare the town, end the cycle." The Harbinger tilted its head, considering. Then it nodded. Pain lanced through Lydia's body as the Harbinger reached out, its shadowy fingers enveloping her. The world faded into darkness, but not before she saw the mist begin to lift from the forest. The balance was restored. When the townsfolk emerged from their homes the next morning, they found the forest brighter, the air lighter. But Lydia Harper was never seen again. Her name became a whisper among the trees, a cautionary tale for those who dared to challenge the Harbinger's call.